Okay, the rich grow richer, the gains of Reagan economics. Uh, Overall, some of the benefits that people experienced was that inflation was going to be reduced to 4%. It went from double digits to 4 for the rest of the decade. In the 1980s, employment is going to go up. About 19 million more people were working, although blue-collar jobs were decreasing. A lot of the growth was seen in accountants, technicians, lawyers, some of them in service sector jobs, financial, transportation, healthcare. The losses of Reaganomics, some of those higher-paying manufacturing jobs, those that were making about $20 an hour, are going to go down to minimum wage. So they're declining, plus they're losing a lot of their wages. The wealthy are going to benefit quite a bit. About 55% of the economic growth goes to 0.5% of the population. Poor are left in poverty. Middle class not really getting as much of the benefits. But in terms of the economy as a whole, it was increasing and getting a lot better than where it had been. Coming up to the 1984 election or re-election for Reagan, the improving economy is definitely going to help his campaign. It appears to have delivered on his promise of getting a hold of inflation, reviving the economy. There is a growing gap between the rich and the poor. It leads to recovery of 16 million new jobs. Unemployment drops to below 6%, whereas it had been about 10 when he came in. Inflation was low. Median income was going up. So a lot of that is people's pocketbooks are feeling better. The economy overall is improving, and so a lot of people are going to want to stick with Reagan. In the 1984 election, he goes up against Walter Mondale, who was the vice president for Carter previously. Mondale is going to run on his ticket with Geraldine Ferraro, first female vice presidential ticket. She's a female congresswoman from New York. Reagan, with the incomes rising, unemployment shrinking, all of that allows him to win 525 electoral votes to 13, had the fifth largest popular vote in election history. He had the South, the West, pulls from the Democratic Northeast, the swing votes in the Midwest. He basically pulls every single state but Mondale's home state of Minnesota, as you can see in the map. Reagan, with his foreign policy, he was determined to return the U.S. to its prestige and world standing that he believed it had dropped to an all-time low. Wanted to strengthen our defenses, recapture world supremacy from the Soviet Union, so we do see a steep increase in military spending. His plan was to basically more than double defense spending, emphasize new weapons, the B-1 bomber, the MX nuclear missile. 1985, the defense budget was over $300 billion, very aggressive foreign policy. And a lot of this was against what he called the evil empire. Soviet Union was the focus of evil in the modern world, saw the Russians as bent on a world revolution. We still had the SALT II Treaty. The SALT II Treaty was the one that had said that the two countries needed to freeze their offensive missiles for 5 years. We still had that treaty, but more missiles are being developed, so it's not really doing its job as a treaty. Our response to this was to deploy our own missiles in Europe. We placed over 500 missiles within range to Moscow, a lot of weapons on bases in England and Germany. We also developed our anti-missile system, known as Star Wars, or SDI. The use of lasers, particle beams to destroy incoming missiles in outer space. And all of this, the Russians are also building up their nuclear arsenal. Between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, there was about 50,000 warheads in the nuclear arsenals. In the Middle East, a lot of turmoil there. In Israel, the Israelis had invaded Lebanon. In Lebanon, the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, was based in southern Lebanon, was raiding across the Israeli border. Lebanon had become home to thousands of Palestinian refugees. They created a state within a state in Lebanon. Israel is going to invade to secure its northern border and destroy the PLO. Reagan really doesn't take a lot of action initially beyond this, but then in an international response, the U.S., France, and Italy send troops to maintain order there. The PLO is going to be evacuated to Beirut, but Americans were going to start to get involved pretty much in this Lebanese civil war. And Reagan's going to declare they were protecting Lebanon from the Soviet-backed Syria, but we are going to have to pull out our troops when, in 1984, terrorists drove a truck loaded with explosives into the American barracks, killing 200 U.S. Marines. Gives Reagan really no choice to back out. So we evacuate Lebanon. We had good intentions, but experienced a lot of humiliation similar to that in Iran under Carter, and so we're going to leave it a little bit worse for wear. the Arab-Israeli situation. He wanted to try to come up with an agreement similar to the Camp David Accords that Carter had, but we're going to have to back out of that situation. All right, in Central America, our intervention against Latin America, we usually backed the repressive right-wing dictatorships rather than the leftist groups that raise the radical issues. We're going to be looking for trying to help out this against the Sandistas in Nicaragua. Sandistas were the forces that had a lot of ties to Castro, Cuban social or communist forces. And so we're trying to covertly back the rebel forces known as the Contras, exiles that were fighting the Sandistas with funds that we're going to get from selling arms to Iran. And we're going to be talking about that on the next slide. So we're looking at trying to fund them and the authority to oust them, but it's not really working out legally, and so it's going to be one of the scandals of the Reagan administration. We also are part of an invasion of Grenada. The leftist prime minister was replaced with a more radical regime. We sent in 2,000 Marines to invade, prevent communists from taking a strategic military base, faced 800 Cubans as well, but we do succeed in that expedition. The Iran-Contra affair, we are going to sell advanced weapons to Iran to try to free some American hostages. There were 9 of them. In the result of this and part of this, we sell the arms. The profit from the arms sales is going to go to the Contras in Nicaragua. We sold them at a much inflated price. For example, we might sell them for $10,000 where it cost us a little over $3,000. Because of this, we're going to use a lot of this money. One of the people who helps to allocate a lot of this money was Military Lieutenant Oliver North. He's actually one of the ones who's going to get a lot of the blame for this. The funding violated congressional prohibition. It was against U.S. law, against government policy, and so when this is discovered, it becomes this huge scandal. Did Reagan know about it? Is this a cover-up? A lot of the blame goes to Oliver North. Also goes to CIA director, naval officer. Reagan is going to escape impeachment because people gave him the benefit of the doubt, and his reliance on others to conduct his foreign policy really does give him a disconnect between his policy and the actual decisions on different events such as this one. In the Soviet Union, we have a new leader come to power in Russia, Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev has 2 policies that really help to bring him into more open talks with the West. Perestroika, which was a restructuring of the Soviet Union economy, and Glasnost, a political openness, wanting to improve the American-Soviet relations. So the West, especially the United States, was very excited about the possibilities with this new administration. Over the next few years, Reagan and Gorbachev have several meetings, decide to destroy intermediate-range missiles, decide to get the Soviet Union out of places that they had invaded and had made situations very tense between the two of us. And because of this, the foreign policy is going to really restore America's popularity or favoritism towards Reagan. And during the 80s, 2 social dilemmas that we face: an AIDS epidemic, massive viral epidemic, and a big problem with drug abuse. All right, the AIDS epidemic. AIDS was first detected in 1981, rare form of, they thought it was maybe a rare form of pneumonia and skin cancer. It's going to spread to drug users, recipients of blood transfusions. A lot of mass panic because of shared needles and contaminated blood causes the middle class to really panic. Because of this, Reagan's administration's response was to fund research. It was a little bit slow, rather than to come out right away. Very little funding for education and prevention. And so that's one of the big critics of his administration, was that they didn't do enough fast enough. There is an appointment of an AIDS commissioner, but again, people said this program was inconsistent. It needed anti-discrimination legislation, preventive education, and that should have been the main priority. By 1993, over 250,000 people had been infected. It was a leading cause of death for Americans between 25 and 44. More minorities and young people were being exposed to this. In 1996, the death rate begins to drop. There were some new drugs that would possibly work against the disease. It would cost you about $15,000 a year, and it didn't work on everybody. And also the more education on preventative tactics. All right, war on drugs. 1980s, crack cocaine was introduced, and the addiction is going to spread through all classes. Huge explosion in crime rate, because to support this habit, it would cost about $1,000 a day. People use it once and want more, and be very addictive, and so it led to more crime. It led to more drug deals. A lot more people committing crimes to have the money to support their habit. One of the things to try to go against this was to try to stop the supply line, trying to get the profit of those drug dealers. They actually arrest 8 major cartel chiefs in Colombia, but then Mexico becomes a new pipeline. So there's really not a whole lot to stop it. But they try to continue the policy through Bush's administration and Clinton after Reagan. Anti-drug programs were a major contribution of this. Tried to curtail the use in America because eventually it's about 80% of teens were using illegal drugs. So it was a major problem. Passing the torch between the administrations, Republicans are going to keep up their majority at this point, or their popularity, as Reagan's administration and the ending on an upswing allows George Bush to come in for the next presidency. And we also are looking at an economic boom in the 80s and possibly the end of the Cold War. There's a couple of things in the notes that I didn't put on the slides here. This is going to be last couple points. If you want to go back and look for Bush's administration, there's a lot of things on there, but I'm just going to quickly finish this. With Tiananmen Square, a couple of major events against bringing kind of the peak and the end of the Cold War. Tiananmen Square, Chinese students were protesting for democracy. Several hundred were killed, thousands wounded. Berlin Wall, huge advancement on the liberation of Europe and the Berlin Wall as it begins to be torn down. One of Reagan's most famous quotes of Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and using that to see the end of it. And the Berlin Wall had really been a visual symbol of the Cold War, and seeing that torn down made a huge impact. 1992, USSR was dissolved. Communist Party was outlawed in the Russian Republic. Republics were dissolved to form a loose alliance, the CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States. And very cautious response by George Bush. We do have 2 treaties, START 1 and START 2. START 1 was to reduce warheads to less than 10,000. START 2 was to eliminate land missiles and nuclear warheads to less than 3,000. So seeing an end as well to the arms race. All right, and then the last part of it, in Panama, we get involved trying to install a government friendly to the United States, ousting a drug trafficking general. In 1990, with dictator Saddam Hussein, Iraq will occupy Kuwait, which threatened the world's oil supply. So the U.S. launches Operation Desert Storm, approved by George Bush to use force to liberate Kuwait. The outcome of that was that the Iraqi force will collapse. We hit targets in Baghdad and Iraq. Soldiers' defense network was knocked down. Bush's approval rating hits 90%, and the economic recession is going to be prolonged. We felt the tone for Vietnam, and it halted the slow economic recovery. And that's it.